Welcome to the training on positive behavioral interventions and supports. As many of you know, PBIS has been in place at the American School for the Deaf since 2011. The Connecticut State Department of Education, the State Education Resource Center, designated PACES as a model demonstration program in 2015, and the American School for the Deaf, a PBIS banner school, in 2016. PBIS is an evidence-based practice for building a positive social culture that will promote both social and academic success. PBIS is not a fad. It has been in place for 20 years, and the PBIS framework is visible in all 50 states. PBIS is school-wide. As many of you know, you see multiple staff giving out tickets or doing collective earning in classrooms across the entire campus. So we want to see PBIS used by everyone who works at the American School for the Deaf. These are some examples. The kitchen staff who serve great food every day, the librarian, the plant operations staff, bus drivers, teachers, and support staff, including staff in the dormitory. At ASD, we teach 3 school-wide expectations: be respectful, be responsible, and be safe. Those were the 3 expectations that were chosen back in 2011 when the American School for the Deaf sent a team of staff for a 3-year training through the State Department of Education. We reinforce positive behavior, so both students and staff receive reinforcement. You may have noticed that there are STAR boards, S-T-A-R boards, at different places around campus to highlight the positive impact that teachers and support staff have on students. And we keep data through our SWIS program, SWIS. I think many of you have heard us talk about that repeatedly, and the word or our collection of data has become an everyday discussion at ASD. Why PBIS? Well, because research shows that getting tough doesn't work. How many years have schools used detention halls, in-school suspensions, and home suspensions? I was in school, for example, in the 60s and 70s, and they were using detentions, in-school suspensions, and out-of-school suspensions. And here we are in 2018 trying to use the same approaches to change behavior. If it worked, we wouldn't still need to use it. That's why PBIS has become the choice for us and for, as I said, 50 other states in the country to try to address children's behavior and adult behavior, I should add. So how has it solved behavioral problems? Well, we found that the reactive emotional responses that we grew up with maybe, or that we still use sometimes, have not been really successful. They don't have long-term success. So when we experience a negative behavior in a situation, we want to fix it. We want to solve it quickly. We want it to be out of our way. For example, if a student is continuing to have a problem in a classroom, we want to send that student to the office. We want to remove them from the environment. We may also choose to remove ourselves, so move the class or ask the student to go to another staff or another class, or tell that staff person, take care of that, move that student away. Or we try to change the physical environment. We move the student's desk maybe to the back of the room, maybe we move it closer to the teacher, or we say, you have to go sit in the hallway. These are all typical responses that are very, very common and have been for many years. So what we say is, you know what, to the student, you know what, get your act together, fix it, knock it off, okay? Or we blame somebody else. We blame the aide, the RC, the TA. We blame the teacher. We blame anyone except really trying to focus on how can we repair the problem. When behavior still doesn't improve, we get tougher, Like, we're gonna get tougher, even though getting tougher we already know didn't really work, we're gonna get even tougher. So we say no with even more power. We move closer to the student and we point. We start writing SAFE forms and, office discipline referral forms or a SAFE form. In the past, many of you will remember that we used to have point papers for PACE students, for example, and it was very common to say, you're gonna get a 0. You're gonna get a 0. Well, we weren't unique. ASD was not, this only happens at ASD. This was very common in all behavior programs and all schools, actually, when children had any kind of, behavior tracking data sheet or something. So we tried to sort of embarrass and humiliate a child to get them to conform. We might threaten or establish a bottom line. Okay, that's it, I'm done with you, get out. We may send to an administrator for, quote, punishment, going back to those ideas of a detention hall or a suspension, or, they're not going to be able to go out for recess, or whatever kinds of things we reactively think are going to solve the problem. In some very few cases, this actually works. And some children do respond to that, but most children do not. So it hasn't really solved the problem. What does this do when we're reactive and punitive? Well, it supports an environment of power and control. So it does not encourage collaboration, give and take, and working together. It triggers and reinforces antisocial behavior. What that really means is refusal, anger, oppositional types of behavior. It devalues the child-adult relationship. So what happens is what should be a very positive relationship between, say, a teacher and their student becomes a very sort of devaluing negative relationship. And it weakens the relationship between the academic and social behavior programming. So expecting a child to behave in your class and they're not behaving in your class and therefore they're not learning, it's weakening that relationship. So positive reinforcement and positive support to the student generally should lead to an improvement in their academic performance. The science of behavior has taught us that students are not born with bad behaviors. They don't just, arrive on Earth and, become oppositional. We've all had babies or children, I shouldn't say we all, but some of us who have been, babies that cried a lot, or, at 2 years old or 3 years old, they're testing and they're doing all those kinds of things. Those are normal developmental kinds of milestones that children go through. But children are not born to be bad. They do not learn when they're presented necessarily with negative consequences. So those negative consequences that we talked about a couple minutes ago with detention hall or getting more punitive or yelling louder or negative facial expressions, those kinds of things haven't scientifically shown that they actually improve children's behavior. Children do learn better ways of behaving by being taught directly and receiving positive feedback. So reteaching, you've heard us use those terms many times, teaching and reteaching. In particular, I always use the example that deaf children don't necessarily have the communication at home that is helping them to learn how to behave because many of their parents do not sign. So when it's related to a deaf child, I think it's even more important for them to be taught directly what the expectations are. They do not necessarily learn sitting around the dinner table when their parents are correcting, say, a sibling for something that's not appropriate at the dinner table. The deaf child doesn't have the advantage, if there's no communication, of learning that. So we are in the role of being able to reinforce that because we have the communication access with a deaf child. The power of PBIS is not in giving rewards, it's in how the expectations are taught. And in a classroom, for example, the 3 expectations, respectful, responsible, safe, should be repeated all day long when the teacher or the aide or RC, TA, whoever is interacting with the child. For example, wow, thank you, Sue, for bringing in your homework. That was really responsible. John, I really thank you for not jumping up on the desk, because that was not safe. So those 3 words, respect, responsible, and safe, should be repeated just in everyday conversations. That eventually becomes intrinsic. They begin to understand, oh, okay, oh, right, I remember, standing on a chair is not safe, it's not respectful, and it's not responsible. That's right, I was corrected on that a few times. And after a while, it becomes just part of who they are. So research says, and we'll review a pyramid in a minute, but Tier 1 PBIS is for all students. So those are the kinds of things that we put in place for all students. For example, a recognition board, the positive, safe forms that we put up for kids. Every kid can get one of those. Every kid can, is entitled to go to a special assembly, right? That's part of what we say is for every child at ASD. That is for all students. It increases pro-social, which is really just positive social behavior, increases the organizational health and climate, so the school and residential health and climate. And again, we're talking about Tier 1, which is our green color, you'll see in the next slide. It has shown in research to increase statewide test scores. So academics, when children are just in a positive school climate, and that's just part of who you are as a school, then it has been shown to improve academic scores. Positive reinforcement as just part of your culture in a school decreases office discipline referrals or SAFE forms. It decreases suspensions. It decreases reported bullying. Okay, there's always children who may say, I'm being bullied, that we are not aware of, but the children who report it, there is shown to be a reduction. And then at the bottom of this slide, you see a number of researchers' names. It's really important for everyone to know that some of those researchers and some of the premier leaders of PBIS internationally work at the University of Connecticut. So, for example, George Sugai is internationally famous, and he knows about us, and he's impressed with ASD because we have been able to take PBIS and apply it to not only the general population at ASD, but to a population of specialized students, those in PACES, and in the residential setting. We really led the way in that, ASD. There had not been the application of PBIS in this format, I will say, this framework, to a residential setting. And so we're very well known for that. And as a result, we have been asked to present at many, many conferences around the country. So we have an advantage in Connecticut that all those other, 49 states don't necessarily have. So this is the pyramid I was talking about. Okay, so when you set up a PBIS framework, and when we did this in 2011, we had to have the administration say, we're behind you, and we had that. Then we had to go for training, and during that 3 years, we established a PBIS leadership team, which meets monthly. And you see that on the outside circle of the pyramid here. And we had to have staff buy-in. We had to have everybody give it a shot. And we had to use the data that we collected from that to make changes and look at how we were doing things. So on the right, you see the 3 tiers. You have tier 1, which applies to all students. And you can, look at the individual things in tier 1, but some, for example, are effective instruction and classroom management, teach school-wide positive behavioral expectations, which is for all students, positive reinforcement for all students, and consistent consequences for problem behaviors. So the consequences need to be the same for every student in tier 1. Tier 2 are the students that we begin to notice need extra support. So we may put in place specific instruction in social skills that student is struggling with. Social skills, for example, respecting their peers, behaving appropriately in the cafeteria, not calling out in class constantly, all those sort of target behaviors that are starting to interfere essentially with the child's education or with the education or the social interaction of their peers. And we might come up with simple behavior plans or simple interventions that we think may help. One idea might be check in, check out, so that that student has a preferred teacher or staff person that every morning they stop by and say, hey, and then the teacher says, yeah, we're gonna have a good day, aren't we? What are we gonna do today to make this a good day? And reinforce that. And then at the end of the day, the teacher or the support staff again meets with the student, says, how'd it go today? Did you have a good day? Did you struggle? And some students might need a check-in, check-out in the middle of the day. So it all depends on how much support that individual student needs. We begin to look at alternatives to punitive reactions like suspensions. Can we give that, for example, can we give that student a positive activity? Or can we give them an activity that kind of repairs some of the things that they've done wrong? For example, if they're found to being, throwing their food in the cafeteria and it's become a real problem, maybe they need to start taking responsibility for cleaning the cafeteria tables after lunch every day. But that's not a suspension. It is a way to reteach how to respect the environment. We may give them increased academic support. We may assign them a school-based mentor or somebody, a peer that can kind of support them and be a leader to them. We may send staff into classrooms to give teachers support and give that student support in the classroom. And I know you're all aware of many of our counseling and social work staff who come into the classroom to support that. And then we go up to tier 3, and that is only about 5% of the students at the American School for the Deaf, and pretty much everywhere in every school. So that's where we may actually go that next step and have a PPT meeting and have it approved for a functional behavioral assessment, an FBA. We may bring the parents into it on a level that's more involved than had been previously. We may be contacting their physician or mental health professional to talk about how we can give this student additional supports so they can learn better and have better relationships with adults and peers, and or intensive academic support. So are we going to put into place tutoring? Are we going to put into place somebody who's going to kind of sit with them at their desk in the classroom and help them get through lessons? So the foundations of PBIS, this I'm going to talk about very briefly, but I just wanted you to understand that it was not something that we just invented one day and we said, oh, we're just going to call it PBIS and start doing PBIS. So its roots, or where PBIS comes from, is the science of psychology. And under psychology is one category called behaviorism. And many of you have gone to college and you've taken a psychology class, and one of the things you studied was behaviorism. And there were famous psychologists that believed you could change behavior by reinforcing positive behavior rather than negative behavior. So that was the very beginning of this theory, okay? It comes out of psychology. And the belief was that it's learned and that it can be changed. Then you have heard, many of you, about ABA, which is Applied Behavioral Analysis. This became an offshoot from behaviorism, and it uses behavioral interventions in very socially important situations or to address problems in applied settings. So for example, if you have a student who has a very repetitive behavior that you want to extinguish or you want to go away, an ABA trained person might sit with that student and correct them constantly and prompt them. It's constant prompting. No, redirect, 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 with the hope that that student that behavior will eventually go away. And then, oops. And then it went to PBIS, which is something that was found to be easier to apply in any setting. So it's the same principle as behaviorism, and it has some of the same interventions as ABA, but PBIS can be used in grocery stores by a mom, it can be used at home at the dinner table, it can be used by a teacher in the classroom. So it is the same principle in a much more general application. It can apply to environments, many more environments. So when we look again, what do we need for a positive school climate or a positive school culture? We need effective academic instruction, which we have here at ASD. We have great teachers. We have effective behavioral interventions. classroom management. So there are teachers' skills, and then there are people who go in to help the teacher. And you also have RCs and TAs who help with effective behavioral interventions and classroom management. And you need continuous and efficient data-based decision-making, which really means collecting data from safe forms or data sheets or teachers taking notes or whatever, however you want to collect that information, and putting it into a system like Swiss and looking at your numbers and what's happening in different environments. And then you need systems for the durable and accurate implementation. So what that means is you need a solid framework. Many schools say they're PBIS, but they do not even come close to the framework we have. We have lesson plans for every single location on campus, every location, classrooms, cafeteria, bathrooms. We have a rollout. We teach it. We teach it to staff and we teach it to students, and we'll be doing that again this year. So that kind of a framework leads to success over time. When you try to implement a little bit of PBIS because you read a book or you went to one workshop, you bring it back to your school and it is probably not going to sustain because you don't have all of the pieces put together and you don't necessarily have buy-in from the top down. So that's from the board of directors at ASD to Jeff all the way down. It is part of our strategic plan because positive school climate is incredibly important for academic performance, for school safety, and for positive social behavior. What's the function of behavior? Well, this sign kind of says it all, and for those of you who are parents, scream until daddy stops the car, right? That's the billboard under the Dairy Queen sign. So the function of behavior is, wow, you know what? Every time I scream and cry, mom or dad basically gives me what I want. So, oops, I see something I really want, I'm gonna scream and cry, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna get what I want. So there is a perfect example of the function of that child's behavior. Screaming and crying gets me ice cream. So function matters, right? Function's important. The purpose behind somebody's behavior has a meaning. And there's really only two reasons or functions of behavior. One is to obtain something or to get something I want, or the other is to avoid or escape something that I do not want. So if I want to obtain the ice cream and I find out that screaming and crying when I see that sign isn't getting me what I want, I better find a different way for mom and dad to give me what I want. So maybe screaming and crying isn't working. But if I scream and cry, and every time we go by Dairy Queen and I scream and cry, I get my ice cream, then I am obtaining what I want. So it's determining what behavior is going to get you what you want, or what behavior is going to get me out of something or help me escape. I like the example of homework. So I know that if I finish my homework, for example, I may get tickets. So I will get something. And I know my tickets translate into me being able to have extra time at recess. So I'm going to do my homework because I know my teacher is going to let me have extra time at recess, and she's going to give me tickets for doing my homework. On the other hand, if I hate homework, and I'll do anything in my power to not do my homework, which is to avoid, I will, my dog ate my homework, or my pencil broke and I wasn't able to finish my paper during class time, and because I really didn't want to do my homework. So I'll make up excuses as to how I can avoid it. So everything has a meaning. Every behavior has a meaning. If we look at getting attention, we find that some children will call out, right, in class without raising their hand. They want attention, but the teacher continues to not call on them they understand that, wow, I've been redirected. The teacher said, Susie, you've got to raise your hand. Susie, you've got to raise your hand. And then Susie raises her hand and the teacher calls on her. Wow, she got the attention she wanted, but she got it in a positive way. So we've re-taught Susie how to get what she wants. Sensory stimulation. Some children, for example, they want to just throw a ball back and forth. That helps them get grounded. Some children may want a weighted vest. Some children need to just take frequent breaks during class because they get overwhelmed. So it's either to obtain those the sensory stimulation or to avoid or escape it. And that's something that gets analyzed when we collect data. To determine the function of behavior, remember, we need to know what happened before the behavior. We call that an antecedent. And a couple slides earlier when we talked about behaviorism, that psychology, that part of psychology that some of us have learned in classes we've taken, these are the terms they use: antecedent, behavior, consequence. What it really means is before, what happened before, what actually happened, the behavior, and then what was the result. So we want to know what happened before the behavior, and then what do the behaviors look like, and then what usually follows. So when behavior is observed and monitored across time, we can see the possible function of behavior. How do we prevent things that we don't want? Behaviors that we don't want. When we understand why someone behaves a certain way, we can prevent or intervene more effectively. So when we see an antecedent, we want to say, or what happened before, how can we prevent that? So if we know that something always triggers a child's behavior, a teacher saying a certain thing like, now it's time to go to the library. Okay, and the child doesn't like going to the library. And then as soon as the teacher says that, the student starts to act out. We should be wondering, like, why is it every time we say go to the library that the child acts out? And what should we teach the student to do instead? So we want to find a replacement behavior. So what we want to do is say, okay, look, Johnny, we're going to go to the library, and I know that's really hard for you. So I'll tell you what, we could take a book that you want to read, and we can have you sit here and read the book if you're not comfortable being in the group with the other students. So we want to give them an alternative and teach them that they can express themselves. The replacement behavior would be, express yourself. Tell us why you don't want to go to the library so we can try to help you. Just falling on the floor and screaming and crying isn't giving us an idea. So we would try to teach them to express themselves and to communicate with us. And how do we respond to make sure the new skill works? Well, we watch it over time. So we offer alternatives. We ask the student for how we can help them respond differently, and we come to a consequence or an outcome that we think is more positive for that child. So let me get this straight. I don't have to cry and yell to get my cookie, right? So if you just said you wanted a cookie, instead of falling to the ground and banging your fists and screaming, we might have said, okay, or we might have said, well, not now, but you can have a cookie after lunch. We can negotiate that. We can talk about it. You don't have to behave in this way to always get what you want. So what are our key strategies? We want to think about how should we intervene early when we start to see a child becoming angry and agitated. We shouldn't wait and wait and wait until it's beyond the point of really helping that child. We want to review the child's environment, to look at the classroom, for example, and say, you know what, I think that child sitting right there is being overstimulated because he's sitting next to somebody who's very disruptive. Maybe if we move that child to a different area in the classroom, they'll feel calmer, they won't be exposed to that kind of overstimulation. And we want to identify a replacement behavior that can be taught. So for example, let's say the child that's always getting out of their seat and trying to leave the classroom, maybe we want to implement planned breaks. So if we notice, we watch behavior, we say, wow, we notice about every 10 minutes, Johnny gets up and gets agitated and wants to leave the room. So why don't we plan a break every 9 minutes before he gets to the place of being agitated? And a planned break could be 2 minutes, walk around in the hallway, come back to class. So it's problem solving and troubleshooting how we can address and replace the behavior we don't want.
Okay, everyone, so now it's time to talk about data. What can we do with data? We want to evaluate, plan, and implement. Here at ASD, how do we collect our data? We use our SAFE forms, the Student Acknowledgement Form Evaluation. I'm sure that you guys have all seen these. They have changed a little bit since last year, so I just want you to take a moment to look at it, and we're going to go through it really quickly. You need to make sure that you fill every part of the SAFE form out. In the antecedent section, meaning what happened that led to the behavior, that's where we need for you to document what happened before the behavior was seen. Now, I know that Karen talked a little bit about the ABCs, and that's what you're seeing here. We want to make sure that everything matches. Make sure you check off what the behavior was and what the consequence was. Keeping in mind that consequence does not mean punishment. Consequence is the intervention or the action. So when the behavior happened, what did you do to address it? The possible motivation. Did they want to obtain something or avoid something? And then the location. Where did it happen? Now, I know you guys have all heard SWIS, which is School-Wide Information System. We talk about that a lot. What SWIS is it's a web-based decision system. And what we do is we input all of the SAFE forms into SWIS, and that is how we generate our data. There are 3 different components of SWIS. It's a computer application, which means it's web-based. It's secure. We also pay for it yearly, so it is a subscription. And it's continuously available for entry, management, and reporting. We can get into it 24 hours, 7 days a week. It is a comprehensive data collection system. We can document lots of different things within SWIS, and I will show you guys some graphs in a minute. And it is a decision system. Practices and resources which support team-based analysis of data for continuous quality improvement. The data is summarized to provide information about individual students, groups of students, the entire student body, and we can also look at it over any period of time. We have been using SWIS since school year 2012-2013. What we can do with SWIS is we can review school-wide behavior patterns, and we can define behavior patterns in greater detail. Now we're just going to take a quick look at the SWIS dashboard so you guys can see what it looks like for the administrators who enter the SAFE forms. As you can see, it's very comprehensive. It breaks everything down: referral by month, referral by time, and when we say referral, I'm talking about the SAFE forms, referral by location, referral by day of week, referral by problem behavior, referral by grade, and referral by student. Now, to break those down even further, we can look at individual graphs on individual students. So we can see if a student is having a specific behavior problem, what it is it a major or is it a minor? where it's happening, what time it's happening, and even the day of the week that it happens. We can also run these graphs by groups of students too. So if we'd like to see what the entire high school is struggling with, we can pull that up. Or if we want to see just what one individual student is struggling with, we can pull that up. We can also look at our SAFE forms by multi-year. So if we want to see how we're doing this year compared to last year or compared to when we first started, we're able to pull that up. And just to give you guys an idea, we have had a reduction in restraints, seclusions, and 911 calls by 72% since implementation of PBIS here at ASD. And that is a very big deal, and everybody should be very proud of that. When we're looking at the data, we want to make sure that we're asking the appropriate questions. So if there's one problem behavior or multiple problem behaviors, we want to make sure we're looking at how it appears. Is it student to student? Is it student to staff? Are there similarities? And are they majors or minors? Now, direct care staff, teachers, RCs, TAs, nurses, non-administrative staff are going to fill out SAFE forms that are considered minor problem behaviors. Any major problem behaviors should be referred to a supervisor or an administrator right away for the administrator to handle that. Using data to develop solutions. Prevention, teaching, recognition, extinction, and consequences. So prevention, how can we avoid the problem? We can do prevention right here on campus by using things that we already have in place. Our tickets, collective earnings, menus, and individualized reinforcers. As we all know, any student is eligible to receive a ticket at any time for displaying respectful, responsible, or safe behavior. Those tickets can be used for menu items, and they can exchange them for privileges. We also use collective earnings on campus. That can be done classroom to classroom, or dormitory to dormitory, or by groups of students. For example, all of the high school, the elementary, or the middle school. We can also break it down even further and offer students individualized reinforcers for preferred activities. So if a student really enjoys running around on the soccer field, a staff can make a deal with them to exchange their tickets in return for the privilege to go out and run on the soccer field. Now, every student might not enjoy doing that, but that one student might. And PBIS is all about individualizing it for the students. Teaching. How can we define, teach, and monitor what we want? Well, by teaching the appropriate behaviors, being respectful, responsible, and safe. Teaching, reteaching, and redirecting. Recognition. How can we recognize positive behaviors? Well, we do that on campus all the time. We have the STAR board for staff that are recognized, the positive SAFE forms for students that have done behaviors above and beyond, and the LEAF forms, letting everyone acknowledge friends, which are peer-to-peer positive recognition. Extinction. How can we prevent the problem behavior? Well, we need to go back to the prevention step and make sure that we recognize and offer another solution. Consequences. How can we correct problem behaviors? Use the SAFE form. All the choices are there for you. Have a conference with the student. Maybe they owe you time at the end of the class. Consequences don't mean punishment. Consequences are the natural response and reaction to a problem behavior. Improving decision making. Years ago, when we used the point and level system, we would see a problem and immediately state what the solution should be, without regard to whether or not it would or would not be beneficial to the student. Using PBIS, it allows us to break our decision making down even further by using the data. We can identify the problem, work with the team on problem solving, implement a solution, and talk about the action plan. So now we've come full circle on our data. We're back at the graph that we started with. We have our data, and what do we do with it? We evaluate, we plan, and we implement. By evaluating it, we identify what the problem is with precision, and that's using our Swiss system, which is why it's very important that you guys are filling out the SAFE forms fully and completely and giving us as much information as we need. We're then going to plan, which is establishing a goal, what might work for the student. We're going to develop our solutions and then implement those solutions with fidelity, which means everybody needs to be on the same page and needs to be consistent. Then we're going to monitor our outcomes and our goals. We're going to reassess it and revise the solutions as needed. If it worked, great, we can move on and start evaluating data again. If it didn't, we need to go back to the drawing board and put other interventions in place. And lastly, just as a reminder, PBIS is school-wide. It requires classroom, non-classroom, student, family, staff, everybody to be involved and on board.
Data-based decision-making. So why do we use data for decision-making? Well, data helps us to ask the right questions. It may not provide the specific answers, but we use it to identify problems, refine problems, define the questions that lead to a solution. Data helps to place the problem in the context rather than in the students. Collecting, analyzing, and using accurate data supports evidence that what we do as staff is helping a student or not. Looking at the data, we are able to see when a particular support, behavioral support, is either helping a student or not. Data does not judge staff or students. It should be seen and used as neutral and unbiased information. It shows clear evidence of behavior in the context. It helps us to determine goals and next steps as a team to support the students. When we talk about context and behavior in context, we should be looking at the environment and certain triggers in the environment that may impact a student's behavior positively or negatively. Data supports evidence. Continued. Data proves what works well for a student. Data proves what does not work well for a particular student. The data makes it easier for staff to try new approaches to teaching while letting go of approaches that are not. Our goal as educators and paraprofessionals is to support our students in the ways that fit the students the most. When we look at what we're doing and examine whether or not we want to continue repeating history with unproductive behavioral strategies, the data helps us to determine what we want to discontinue. Some students require more out of us as staff, and in order to be successful, we must look closely at ourselves, our patterns, and how what we do impacts others. So what does support look like? Support comes in the form of teamwork and perseverance. Support is provided by more than one individual. Support can be continuous. Support includes being open to hard discussions, and support involves listening to the student. I'd like to talk a little bit about being open to hard discussions, because this may include staff. Ourselves, as adults, sometimes have to look at our own behaviors. We have to look at our own triggers, and we have to determine what we need in order to feel calm and encouraging. It's really important to be able to self-reflect. In times of frustration, we are dealing with significantly behaviorally challenged students that also may have cognitive disabilities, medical disabilities, and physical disabilities. Our work with these students is vital. Our professionalism is vital. For many of these students, we are the biggest supporters they will ever have. And if we're not taking care of ourselves and listening to ourselves, then we're not doing justice by the student. So while we're analyzing our students' behavior through data collection, it is important to also self-reflect on our feelings and our moods, and if we recognize that a particular student or their behavior is triggering us, then we need to look at what we need in order to help ourselves. That may come in the form of support from your team, or your supervisor, or a colleague. We have to practice what we preach, and better care of ourselves and understanding some of these things for ourselves is actually beneficial to the students we work with. Listening. When support involves quote unquote listening to the student, I'm talking about behavior as a means to communication. Sometimes behavior is used to cope when someone feels anxious, self-conscious, tired, angry, maybe pain, or maybe they're experiencing trauma. Support can be listening by observing, documenting, and discussing with the student and/or the team the possibilities of what may be hurting or bothering them. For many of us, we go to a doctor when we are feeling ill and we want answers. What's causing the illness and how can I solve it? How can I resolve this illness? Similarly, a student may need help exploring what is bothering them. And if we can help identify what it is, then we can hopefully provide relief. So listening to the student will include the observation, potentially some communication if the student can explain what may be bothering him or her. And the staff and the teacher that are working with that student have a powerful relationship where they can carry that information to the clinical team or other team members to help resolve the issue for the student or encourage the student to find some other coping means to be successful. Support can come in the form of a clear, laid out plan, such as a behavior intervention plan. A behavior intervention plan offers specific interventions to trial for a certain amount of time. Support can also come in the form of enhancing the student's learning opportunities through a variety of classroom and individual supports. Individual supports for students could include visuals, visual schedules, countdowns, such as a warning to know that an activity is coming to an end for a transition, frequent breaks, additional therapies such as OT, PT, speech, social work services, clinical services, and then of course individualized instruction. Teachers and staff structuring the class strategically based upon the students' interests so that they can access their education and peers is also support. Some students require more support physically, mentally, and emotionally in order to access their education. Looking to other team members for input and feedback regarding a student's successes in other locations throughout the school and their activities is also a form of support. Functional behavior assessment. A functional behavior assessment, or FBA, is largely a team process involving the person who is testing the hypothesis of the behavior, the teachers, the aides, and other related staff. It includes gathering information about behavior in all environments. A student's strengths and where he or she appears to be comfortable and happy are very important pieces of information to focus on. Situations and environments can be modified for testing a hypothesis. This leads to understanding the function of behavior. ABC data, which stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence, is typically used to gather information as to why a student might be engaging in a certain behavior. Oftentimes, the social worker or clinician working with the student will ask a TA, an RC, or a teacher to collect ABC data. This is an ongoing process that helps us to identify what is working for a student or not working for a student. It may also help us to identify specific triggers for specific behaviors. That leads us to a successful planning in order to prevent or implement strategies to alleviate any stressors on the student. Behavior Intervention Plan, or BIP. Behavior intervention plans are another form of support for students in Tier 3. Tier 3 students require extra reinforcement and extra individualized instruction, particularly around behavior. For PACE students, upon admission, the clinical team will complete an FBA and BIP, as well as an individual treatment plan, or an ITP. The process is a little different for core students who mostly do not arrive with a functional behavior assessment or BIP in place. Once the function of behavior is clearly understood, the team can create a behavior intervention plan. The BIP includes a goal with a measurable target, usually a number or percentage set by the team. The goal, like an educational goal, should be achievable for the student. The desired frequency or percentage of a wanted behavior can be increased over time. The goal for these students will likely require extra support from the team. The desired behavior will need to be taught and reinforced frequently for the student to learn the expectation and be able to apply it. The goal with a behavior intervention plan for many students is to render ourselves useless whenever possible. Some students will need ongoing support for longer periods of time to unlearn unwanted, non-functional behaviors. Some may benefit from intensive support for a few months, while others may need support for a few years before they can become independent. It varies for every student and is based on their need.
If you have any additional questions related to PBIS or the content you've just seen, please contact one of the leadership team members.